2 months had passed since the video of the burning moped shook the internet. The small town where Alyssa lived was no longer the same. In every diner, people were still talking about her story. Some were in awe, others sneered. To many, Alyssa was a symbol of courage. But to others, she was seen as a troublemaker who embarrassed the institution. That morning, Alyssa walked to her high school. She wore her usual jeans and hoodie, her hair in a neat ponytail. But now, every step felt heavier. A few friends looked at her with admiration, while others whispered behind her back. "Hey, isn't that the viral Alyssa?" "Yeah. But I heard because of her, the cops in this town are constantly under review. It's a hassle for everyone. Feel bad for her dad. Must have a lot of enemies now." Alyssa pretended not to hear, but her heart still stung. She entered her class, sat at her desk in the front row, and opened her textbook. But she couldn't fully concentrate. Her history teacher, Ms. Rainey, watched Alyssa from the front of the class. After the lesson ended, she called her over softly. "Alyssa, a moment, dear." Alyssa approached. "Ma'am?" Ms. Rainey looked at her student's face gently. "Are you still holding up?" Alyssa gave a small smile. "I have to be, ma'am." Ms. Rainey took a deep breath. "You know, when I was your age, I also got angry seeing injustice. But I stayed silent. Now I see you. I know staying silent was wrong." Alyssa looked down, her eyes welling up. "Sometimes I want to be silent too, ma'am. But every time I remember that moped being burned in front of me, I can't just pretend to forget." Ms. Rainey patted her shoulder. "Don't be afraid to be right. The world is hard on honest people. But honest people always leave a mark." A few days later, Alyssa received an invitation from the state's ACLU chapter. They wanted her to be a speaker at the Youth Voices for Justice event. Her father, Mark, was surprised when he read the letter. "A speaker? You?" Alyssa smiled hesitantly. "I've never spoken in public before, Dad. But if this can help make people aware, I want to try." The day arrived. The event hall was full of college students, journalists, and community members. In front of a large banner that read, "Justice Never Fades," Alyssa stood at the podium, her hands shaking slightly. Cameras flashed from every direction. She took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name is Alyssa Miller. I'm not an activist, not a politician. I'm just a regular high school student who lost her moped because I refused to pay a bribe to a police officer. That day, I was terrified. But I was more afraid of what would happen if I stayed silent. Because silence means I agree that ordinary people don't have rights. I want this country to be a place where people can be honest without being punished, where they can refuse a shakedown without losing everything. If the courage of one teenager can change even a little bit of a broken system, then the fight wasn't in vain." Thunderous applause erupted. Some stood, some wiped away tears. From that day on, Alyssa's name became known nationally. Many news outlets wrote about her. Some educational institutions even invited her as a symbol of young anti-corruption. But not all who came were sincere. One afternoon, a man in a sharp suit came to their house. He introduced himself as Ryan, a producer for a major TV network in New York. "Mark, Alyssa, we want to turn your story into a television movie. It's so inspirational. Of course, we'll provide appropriate compensation." Mark glanced at Alyssa. "What do you think, honey?" Alyssa looked at Ryan carefully. "If the movie can make a lot of people aware, I'll do it. But I don't want the story sensationalized for ratings. This isn't entertainment. This is about the truth." Ryan's smile was a bit stiff. Of course. We'll protect the moral message." However, when the movie aired a few months later, Alyssa watched with a heavy heart. Her story was changed. She was portrayed as emotional, rude, and the burning incident was made to look like a misunderstanding. "Dad," she said softly in the living room. "They changed everything." Mark stared at the TV screen, his jaw tight. "That's how it works, honey. The truth in the wrong hands can become a tool." After the broadcast, public opinion was split again. Some began to doubt Alyssa. Huh, maybe the cop wasn't entirely wrong. Even the TV movie said Alyssa was resisting. Maybe they were both at fault. Alyssa felt exhausted. The same social media that once supported her now turned into a space full of hateful comments. That night, she turned off all her notifications and sat on the porch. "Was I wrong, Dad?" she asked quietly. Mark looked at her with love. "You weren't wrong, honey. But the world sometimes doesn't like people who expose the darkness. Because that darkness is comfortable for them." Alyssa looked up at the stars. "If that's the case, then let me be a small candle in the middle of it." A few weeks later, Officer Roberts faced a disciplinary hearing. The news was broadcast on all channels. He was found guilty and officially fired from the police force. However, his criminal case was still ongoing in the district court. When the judge read the verdict, Roberts hung his head. There was no anger on his face this time, only exhaustion. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Alyssa for an interview. "Alyssa, what's your reaction now that the officer has been found guilty?" Alyssa answered softly, "I'm not happy to see someone punished, but I'm relieved because the law finally sided with what's right." Another reporter asked, if given the chance, would you forgive him? Alyssa paused for a moment, then said, "I already forgave him on the first day my moped was burned." But forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. That answer became a viral quote on social media. Many people posted it as their status, and it was even printed on banners at college campuses. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. However, Alyssa's life didn't just return to normal. After the case ended, she began to feel isolated. Some friends kept their distance, afraid of being dragged into the trouble. One day in the school cafeteria, two of her old friends sat at a different table. "Hey, don't sit with Alyssa, you'll end up on the news again. Just leave her, she's famous now." But being famous isn't always a good thing, right? Alyssa heard it all, but she chose to remain silent. She was learning that having the courage to fight injustice often meant having the courage to be alone. Fortunately, her true friend, Rachel, was always by her side. "LSS, you know what? I used to want to be like you. But after seeing your struggle, I realize being an honest person isn't easy." Alyssa smiled. If everyone realized that, maybe the world would be a little better. A few months passed, and Alyssa graduated from high school with high honors. Many universities offered her scholarships, including from Georgetown and Berkeley. However, she chose to study law at the State University in Ohio. When asked by a reporter why, she answered simply, "I want to learn the law, not to become a politician, but so I know how to protect little people like I was." Those words made many respect her all over again. Some young lawyers even contacted her to volunteer for their free legal aid programs. On one occasion, Alyssa met Captain Williams again, who had since been promoted. They met at a youth law seminar in D.C. Williams shook her hand proudly. "Did you know that because of your case, there's a lot of new ethics retraining for new recruits at the police academy? Your name is mentioned in the training module." Alyssa was surprised. "Seriously, sir?" Williams smiled. "Yes. Sometimes change really does start from a wound, but that wound leaves a lesson." Alyssa looked down and smiled faintly. "Then everything that happened wasn't for nothing, was it, sir?" "No, kid," replied Williams. "You changed something, even if you haven't realized it yourself." But the story wasn't really over. One night, Alyssa received a letter from an anonymous sender. Inside the envelope was just a slip of paper with a few words written on it. "Thank you. Because of you, I had the courage to refuse a shakedown on the street yesterday. The cop was mad, but I wasn't afraid anymore." The morning air at the Banyumas precinct felt heavy. Unlike usual, the atmosphere was tense. Officer Diaz arrived looking exhausted. He hadn't slept all night. Every time he closed his eyes, the image of Rosa's face appeared, her eyes flashing, her voice echoing in his head. "Tomorrow morning, the truth will come out on its own. Don't be too late to apologize." He tried to shake the thought, but failed. In the briefing room, Officer Russo was also pale. "Man, last night the lights in the office flickered out again. I heard a sound. Like someone crying from the holding cell," he said quietly. You're hallucinating, Russo. Don't say weird stuff, Diaz snapped, but his tone was uncertain. They walked towards the holding cells. When Diaz opened the door, he was startled. Rosa was sitting calmly in the corner, but in front of her, the cell bars looked slightly bent, as if from intense pressure. What did you do last night? Diaz asked loudly, though he sounded more nervous than angry. Prayed, Rosa answered simply. I just asked God to reveal the truth. Her gaze made Diaz freeze. He shut the door and walked away quickly. The truth goes viral. Meanwhile, outside the station, a video of the necklace being discovered in the trash bin behind MS. Baker's store had spread widely. Local reporters began arriving at the market. They interviewed the vendors who found it. I was shocked because it's the exact same necklace that was supposedly stolen, said a woman who sold rice. That means the girl wasn't guilty, right? Another resident chimed in. On social media, comments exploded. That poor girl, she was framed. If the police really arrested the wrong person, they have to be held accountable. The news reached Captain Miller. He immediately drove to the precinct in his unmarked car. His face was hard, holding back anger. Captain Miller's arrival. When the black sedan pulled up in front of the precinct, all the officers on duty immediately stood straight. Diaz and Russo, who were in the break room, looked out nervously. It's Miller, Russo whispered. Miller strode in without saying much. He went straight to Diaz's desk and stared at him sharply. Where is she? Diaz swallowed hard. Sir, we were just following procedure. We had evidence, a witness. The evidence from the trash can behind the store? Miller cut him off. Sir, please, just listen. I've heard everything. That video is viral, and I just got a report. MS. Baker's store. Turns out she owed Rosa's father money from 2 months ago. Russo immediately looked down. Diaz was silent for a long time. Captain, this is probably just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? Miller moved closer. His voice was cold. You accused, dragged, and even humiliated an innocent woman. Do you realize the consequences of what you've done? Diaz didn't answer. Miller turned and headed for the holding cells. When the door opened, Rosa stood up. Sir, she said faintly, but her eyes were steady. Miller looked at her with mixed emotions. Are you okay, kid? I'm fine, sir. I'm just sad. They wouldn't listen. You're getting out now. It's all cleared up. Miller signed the release forms on the spot, leaving the 2 officers speechless. But before Rosa fully exited the station, Diaz tried to speak. Rosa. We were just doing our jobs. Rosa looked at him for a moment, then replied softly but deeply, If a job is done without a conscience, sir, it's not a job. It's just blind power. The words hit hard. Diaz couldn't hold her gaze. The strange signs. From that day on, Rosa and her mother's life returned to normal. But not for Diaz and Russo. In the following days, strange occurrences began to haunt them both. The first night, Diaz heard footsteps outside his house. When he went out, no one was there. But in the wet dirt by the gate, there were small footprints, as if someone had just walked by. He ignored it. But the next night, the lights in his house shut off by themselves, and on the living room window, he saw Rosa's reflection standing still, staring at him without expression. He gasped and yelled, but the reflection vanished. Meanwhile, Russo experienced something similar. While sleeping, he dreamed he was back in the interrogation room. He saw Rosa sitting across from him, staring intently and saying, You know what that fear feels like, officer? So did I, when you dragged me away without proof. Russo woke up in a cold sweat. But on his nightstand was a fresh, wet cabbage leaf. The same vegetable that had spilled from Rosa's bag. The investigation's reversal. A few days later, the official investigation results came out. Based on the store's CCTV footage, the real thief wasn't Rosa, but one of MS. Baker's own employees who had worked with someone else. They wanted to cover up the theft by accusing someone else. The case shook the local public. Miller demanded full justice and ordered an internal investigation into the two officers for their wrongful arrest. The media wrote, "Arrogant cops arrest wrong person. Market girl proven to be victim of frame-up." Rosa's name became known. Many locals came to her house to apologize for having accused her. But the girl just smiled and said gently, "I've already forgiven you." The important thing is the truth came out. But even as everyone else felt relieved, the two officers could not find peace. The growing fear. One night, Russo decided to go to Diaz's house. His face was pale, his eyes red from lack of sleep. "Man, I can't take it. I have nightmares every night. Sometimes I hear a girl crying right behind me. I'm sure it's her." Diaz sighed heavily. "Me too. But I don't want to believe it's supernatural. We just feel guilty, that's all." Suddenly, a loud knock echoed at the door. They both looked at each other. "Who is it this late?" mumbled Russo. Diaz opened the door. No one was there. But on the doormat was something. A worn cloth bag filled with vegetables. And one small gold necklace inside. Diaz's face went white. Russo backed away slowly. "Man, this isn't possible, right?" Diaz stared at the bag for a long time, then kicked it away. "Enough. We're not talking about this. It's just a coincidence." But after that night, they both started to get sick. High fevers, headaches, and constant nightmares. They tried going to a doctor, but the results were normal. Nothing was medically wrong. The meeting at the church. A few days later, on his family's advice, Russo went to see an old priest in his neighborhood, Father Michael, who was known for his wisdom. "Father, my partner and I, we may have wronged an innocent person. Now we feel haunted," Russo said, trembling. Father Michael looked at him for a long time. "That disturbance isn't from a spirit, son. It's from your own heart. Guilt is a heavy burden if you haven't asked for forgiveness. But we're already sorry, Father. Being sorry isn't enough if you haven't asked forgiveness from the one you hurt." Russo was silent. That very night, he and Diaz agreed to find Rosa to apologize in person. The apology. That morning, Rosa was helping her mother at their small grocery stand when the two officers arrived. Neighbors watched from a distance. Diaz and Russo were not in uniform. Their faces looked completely different. Tired, remorseful, and scared. Rosa looked at them calmly. "Can I help you, officers?" she asked softly. Diaz looked down. "We came to apologize. We were terribly wrong. We accused you without proof. We've gotten our karma." Russo was in tears. "We're begging you for forgiveness, Rosa. Our lives haven't been right since it happened." Rosa was quiet for a long time, then said softly, "I already forgave you both that night. But remember, justice isn't supposed to be used to scare people. If you ever become officers again, please use your heart, not your ego." Diaz and Russo wept openly. They bowed their heads, then shook Rosa's mother's hand, asking for her prayers. From that day on, the strange disturbances stopped. They began to return to their work, changed. That afternoon, the sun beat down on the small Midwestern town. The heat was like an ember penetrating the skin. Along Main Street, cars and trucks moved between the rows of diners, auto shops, and convenience stores. The sound of mufflers mixed with the calls of a food truck vendor trying to attract customers. Amid the bustle, a high school student in jeans and a hoodie steered her moped slowly. On her back hung a canvas tote bag that read, "Love the planet, reject corruption." Her name was Alyssa Miller, 17, a junior at the local high school. Her hair was in a neat braid, her face calm, but her eyes held a courage unusual for someone her age. She was just heading home from school after a student council meeting. Alyssa was known at school as a student who was critical and brave enough to speak up about honesty and justice. Her father, Mark, was a simple mechanic in a small garage near their house. Her mother had passed away long ago, and Alyssa often helped her father after school. As her moped passed an intersection near the market, she saw a small, temporary sign, "Traffic Safety Operation." 3 police officers were standing there. One of them, a large, tall man with sunglasses, seemed to be holding a ticket book. Next to him, two other officers were stopping several drivers. Alyssa slowed her moped. She knew she hadn't broken any laws. She was wearing a helmet, her papers were in order. But a sense of nervousness still crept in, as locals had recently been complaining about sudden checkpoints that felt more like shakedowns. The tall officer raised his hand. "Stop, kid." Alyssa pulled over, hit the kill switch, and turned off the engine. "Yes, officer." "What's the problem?" The officer looked her up and down, then glanced at the old moped. "License and registration, kid." Alyssa opened her bag and handed over her license and registration. The officer examined them with a flat expression, then said curtly, "Why is your left side mirror missing?" Alyssa quickly checked her moped, then shook her head. "It's here, sir. It's just a little loose, so I took it off at the shop. I was going to put it back on this afternoon." The officer snapped his ticket book shut. "Can't do that, kid. The rule is the vehicle has to be complete when it's on the road. This is a violation." Alyssa swallowed. "But I'm just going from school to my house, sir. Besides, my papers are all in order. I can go get the mirror from the shop. It's only 5 minutes away." The officer stared at her, then lowered his voice. "Look, let's not make this complicated. Just give me an administrative fee. $100 should do it. Better than having your registration confiscated." Alyssa stared at the officer in disbelief. "An administrative fee?" The officer glanced left and right, then raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, just to speed things up, kid. It's normal. Everyone understands the system. No need to be so rigid." Alyssa looked at him for a long time. Inside her chest, anger and fear mingled. She knew full well this wasn't about the rules. This was a bribe. "I'm sorry, sir," she said firmly. "But I'm not going to give you money if it's not an official fine. I'm willing to take the ticket if I'm really at fault." The officer's face changed instantly. His smile vanished. "You got a lot of nerve talking to me like that?" Alyssa stood tall next to her moped. "I'm just saying what's right, sir." The officer took a step closer. Behind him, the other two officers watched with amusement, as if watching a show. "Little kid trying to lecture me on the law," he said mockingly. "You think we work for free out here in the heat? Police work for the community, sir." "Not for extra cash," Alyssa retorted. The area around them started to get crowded. Several vendors on the roadside were watching, but no one dared to get close. The tension thickened. The officer took a deep breath, then stared at Alyssa with sharp eyes. "Fine. You can sort this out at the station. But because you're stubborn, I'm holding onto your license." He pocketed Alyssa's license and registration. Alyssa tried to stay calm, but her hands were shaking. "Sir, that's my property. You can't keep it without issuing a citation." The officer turned, his face cold. "Are you teaching me how to do my job?" Alyssa pulled out her phone, aiming the camera at the officer. "I'm recording this, sir. For proof. I'm not accusing you, but I want to know the procedure." That small act changed the atmosphere immediately. The tall officer instinctively slapped Alyssa's hand, hard. Her phone flew to the ground. "How dare you?" he yelled. Alyssa bent down to grab her phone. But his black boot stepped on it first. Crack. People started to gather. A woman selling vegetables covered her mouth. A cab driver whispered, "Oh, this is bad." The officer got angrier, maybe because he was embarrassed to be watched by so many people. "You think you can fight me?" "Huh?" Alyssa looked at him, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm just asking for justice, sir." "Justice?" he yelled. He kicked Alyssa's moped, knocking it to the ground. "Here's your justice." Gasoline trickled from the tank. The smell of fuel was strong. The officer pulled a lighter from his pocket, flicked it on, and with a face full of rage, tossed it toward the moped. The fire ignited instantly. Whoosh! The moped was burning in the middle of the street. The flames reflected in Alyssa's pale face. People screamed in panic, but no one dared to approach. Alyssa just stood there. Her tears fell silently. The moped her father had bought with 2 years of savings was now turning to ash before her eyes. The officer turned to the crowd. "Anyone interferes, I'll arrest them," he said loudly, then walked into his patrol car, puffing out his chest. A few minutes later, the fire died down on its own. Only a charred black frame remained. Alyssa knelt on the pavement, her shaking hand clutching the melted ignition key. An old man approached slowly, whispering, "Kid, you have to report this. Don't be silent. But be careful, he's a powerful guy." Alyssa raised her face. Her eyes were no longer just crying, there was a fire in them. A different fire than the one that burned her moped. That evening, Alyssa arrived home on foot. Mark, her father, was fixing an engine in front of the garage. His face immediately tensed seeing his daughter arrive with swollen eyes and no moped. "LSS? Where's your moped, honey?" Alyssa looked down. "Dad. It was burned." "Burned?" Mark immediately stood up. "Who would dare?" "A cop, Dad." The room went silent. The sound of evening birds outside was suddenly clear. "Tell me from the beginning," Mark said softly, but his face was tight. Alyssa told him everything from the checkpoint, the bribe, the refusal, to the moment her moped was set on fire. She showed him the short video she managed to record before her phone was destroyed. Only 2 seconds, but it was enough to see the officer kicking the moped and people screaming. Mark was silent for a long time. His hand gripped a wrench on the table. "Did you get the officer's name?" The name tag said S. Roberts. Mark sighed heavily. "Him. He's been here a long time. A lot of folks don't like him, but no one's brave enough to cross him." Alyssa looked at her father. "If we stay silent, they'll just get bolder." Mark looked at his teenage daughter's face, already speaking like an adult burned by a sense of justice. His heart wavered between pride and fear. "We'll go to the precinct tonight," he said finally. "We'll report it." Alyssa nodded, but in a corner of her heart, there was an anxiety she couldn't erase. Because she knew that fighting someone like Roberts wasn't a small thing in a small town like this. That night at the city precinct, the front reception area was empty. Only a desk sergeant was yawning at his desk. Mark and Alyssa arrived carrying the video evidence and the moped's title. The officer glanced at them, then said coldly, "What's the report?" "An officer burned my daughter's moped," Mark said, calm but firm. The officer immediately stared at them in disbelief. "Which officer?" The name on his uniform was S. Roberts. The sergeant immediately looked nervous. He stood up, then said quietly, "Sir, ma'am, I'd advise you not to blow this out of proportion just yet." Day turned to night, and the morning air in the small town felt calmer than usual. But in Alyssa's heart, the storm hadn't passed. She sat on her porch, staring at the empty street in front of her. That's where her moped was burned. Now, there was only a scorch mark that was starting to fade. A scar that was still hard to forget. But good news came faster than she expected. A reporter from a national news outlet came to her house. "Alyssa, we want to hear your side of the story directly. A lot of people sympathize with you after that video went viral," said the man in the black jacket with a gentle voice. Alyssa was nervous at first, but with her father's encouragement, she told him everything from the beginning. The bribe, the threats, the burning moped, and how the people around her stayed silent out of fear. The reporter listened intently, taking notes on every detail. Not long after, the report appeared on national television with a striking headline, "High School Student Fights Police Shakedown." The small voice that shook the nation. The report infuriated the public. Social media was flooded with the hashtag Justice for Alyssa. Many college students took to the streets, demanding that the officers involved be punished. From being afraid to speak, residents now began to come forward one by one, admitting that bribery in their area had been happening for a long time. That afternoon, 2 black cars arrived at Alyssa's house. From inside, several men in neat suits with state police badges emerged. They introduced themselves as a team from the State Police Internal Affairs Division. "MS. Miller. We're here to investigate further." "Thank you for having the courage to speak," said one of them. They took her detailed statement, then collected forensic evidence from the burn site. Everything moved quickly, as if there was a strong push from the top. Soon, the big news broke. 3 officers, including Officer Roberts, were officially detained and suspended without pay. That night, the whole neighborhood gathered on Alyssa's lawn. Small lights illuminated their relieved faces. The mayor stood in front and said loudly, "This young woman has taught us all the meaning of courage. We were silent for too long, and she's the one who reminded us." Alyssa's tears fell. She never expected her struggle, which began simply to defend her dignity, would bring about such a big change. But she wasn't arrogant. She just smiled and said softly, "I just wanted what was fair, sir." A moped can be replaced, but justice can't. Several months later, help came from many places. An education foundation gave Alyssa a full scholarship so she could attend a top university. There was even a new moped, donated by the town's residents who had pooled their money. But Alyssa never rode that moped with arrogance. She just looked at it and said, "This isn't compensation. This is a symbol that the little guy can also stand tall." Graduation day arrived. Alyssa stood on the school stage in a simple cap and gown. When her name was called, all the students stood and applauded. The teachers looked at her with pride. She received a special award plaque from the school, inscribed for the courage and tenacity to fight for the truth. After the ceremony, Ms. Rainey approached and hugged her. "You didn't just save yourself, dear. You saved all of our dignity." In the distance, Alyssa looked at the evening sky. She knew the fight wasn't over. But at least now, people knew. Never stay silent in the face of injustice, no matter how small. She walked forward calmly, leaving the bitter past behind. And on that road, the evening breeze blew gently, carrying a simple